going on, golf fans? It's your boy Gsluke here with our course breakdown for this week's Masters tournament. It's the first major of the year, first big boy event that we have here in 2025. So I'm going to break down everything you need to know from the course perspective, everything Augusta National Golf Club to get you ready for your exposure. So whether you're a newbie getting your toes in the water for the first time or an experienced veteran playing PGA DFS every single week, we're going to go over all the info that you need about this course to help you out with your research process. So that'll include some course details around Augusta National, a hole-by-hole breakdown of all 18 holes, as well as my custom modeling and comp courses for this week that I'm using to identify my top plays. So by the end, you'll be an expert on what to expect from this event. So without further ado, let's go ahead and hop on in because we've got a whole lot to talk about here. We've got bet the number up to do the complete deep dive here, and with Augusta National, we've got ourselves a long par 72. In fact, the actual scorecard yardage is a little bit over 7,500 yards. You got bent grass greens and a similar type of overseed that you've had the last 2 months on tour. So it's that ryegrass overseed. The one key change though would be the agronomy on the greens. Those bent grass greens, a little bit different than that Poa trivialis overseed that we've seen for the last month or so on tour. So outside of that though, a lot of things going to be similar at this Alistair McKenzie design. And I've got the stat averages up here from the last 3 years. They don't have the fairway average on there, but it's about 71% over the last 3 years, which is solidly over your tour average. But a lot of these other categories are going to be harder than your PGA Tour average. And I'd say from the ball striking perspective, the one easy part about Augusta National would be off the tee. You've got about 40 wide yard fairways, not even a lot of rough around the venue as well. The rough is maybe like a half an inch to an inch long at the very most. So it's mostly about your second shot in, and that's why they call it a second shot golf course, because you can see every other metric that we're looking at here is either going to be lower than the PGA Tour average when it comes to like your green regulation rate, or a little bit harder with some of these other categories. So GIR rate about 7% lower than usual. Scrambling rate also about 6% lower than usual, which has to do with the very, very tricky green complexes that you have around this course. Your birdie average only about 3 per round. Your bogey average about a bogey higher than what you're used to seeing. And when it gets windy out there, things get even more devilish out there. And even on the most perfect days that you have around Augusta National, it's still an extremely tricky track, which is why it's some of the best, one of the most favorited golf courses of any of the players out there on tour. It's Scotty Scheffler win last year, Aubert finished in second. You can see the top 3 there out there from 2024. Year before that was when John Rahm won, and then the year before that was of course when Scotty Scheffler won in 2022. So this is maybe the most publicized event out there, so a lot of you probably familiar with some of those recent champions. Let's look at some of the course analytics quickly. So in terms of it being a bomber's paradise or a short hitter sort of track, it's about a 5.5 out of 10. So as I mentioned, some length off the bat, almost 7,600 yards, but because it is so wide off the tee, you don't necessarily have to be a great driver of the ball. You can be somebody that maybe loses strokes out there in most fields and still have a pretty decent week around Augusta. Your second shot though is where the emphasis comes in. If you end up missing the fairways around this golf course, there is a massive penalty, as you can see over there on the right, but that is not going to happen very often. You're going to get a lot of shots from 125 to 175 this week, and also a lot from 175 to 225. So if there are proximity buckets that we're going to be bumping up a little bit, it would be those two. And then that 50 to 125 range is usually a little bit more prominent than what we're going to get here. So maybe that one is slightly de-emphasized. Around the green, you're going to get a good mix of out of everything other than some rough. So unlike courses like the Farmers Insurance Open, API, where you've got that deep rough around the green, this is a much different test. You're going to have a lot more options around the green because of the fairway cut as opposed to that deep 4-inch rough. And you're also going to have some bunker shots to contend with, and even some putts that you're hitting from off of the surface. So around the green, that's why you don't see a lot of bunker shots included there, as there's really only a few holes where that comes into play. Your putting is extremely difficult around the Masters, and you'll see that with some of these green complexes. They are the most sloped that we get the entire year, and they tend to run the fastest of every golf course that we have as well, which, as you could probably tell, makes for a complete test of golf. You've got to be good in pretty much all 4 stat categories. Like I said, the one category you might be able to get away with it a little bit might be the off the tee play, but even that is still going to be a separator for your top tier players. So now that we've gotten a little bit of an introduction out there to Augusta, let's take a look at it hole by hole and get a taste for all the shots required. A lot of us have probably grown up watching this golf course, so we'll be pretty quick here with the hole-by-hole breakdown, but we'll get a test or an idea for the sort of shots that you're going to have. So your first tee shot could definitely be a 3-wood as opposed to a driver. In fact, they've got this marker at 3-wood distance as opposed to driver, and then your shot in is completely dependent on pin location. This front right pin location would be the easiest out of the 4. This back right is normally what they use for round number 1, which, believe it or not, you think they'd want to give players a handshake into this major championship. That's one of the hardest pins on the golf course there in that back right corner. You've got that slope that you can kind of see from this overhead view there that takes balls down there to that front right corner, and this gives you a real good sense of Augusta National. It's why we're going to take some extra time out there on this hole. To the left side, you've got that tree-lined fairway where, if you miss just a little bit, you miss in this fairway bunker, it's really not the biggest deal unless you get a terrible lie against the side of it. You miss to the left, though, and that's where the problems come into play. If you're a good shot shaper, maybe you can run a draw up onto the front of that surface, maybe over there to the right side in that little fairway cut, and try and get up and down from over there. But if you're somebody that is only has one ball flight, right, maybe a fader of the golf ball and doesn't have draws in play, this is where those kind of players are going to get penalized. So off the tee, if you miss wide, you're gonna have to have shots to get back into play, which means if you're somebody like Jordan Spieth, for example, that's not the most accurate player, then you better have that creative side to it. So, and around the green, I mentioned all the different shots that you could hit, right? Let's imagine you're over here on the right side. You can hit a flop shot over here to even a short-sided pin, or that shot that lands into the bank and then runs up top. And I'll say the second is the most prominent that you're going to see most players going with, as the greens are almost too quick to hit some flop shots. Next, we got hole 2 here, which is 580. This is your first scoreable look. This is the hole where Louis Oosthuizen made an albatross on, so it is reachable in 2, especially if you don't have a bunch of wind out there. Hole 3 is 354. This one is potentially drivable. In fact, you've had guys like Rory McIlroy get close, if even onto the surface before, so a lot of that coming down the wind direction, though, as it plays a little bit uphill. Next up, you have hole 4, which is 247. That would be if they tip it out, and I will say that they're likely going to move it up a little bit for at least 1 or 2 rounds, but still a very demanding par 3, as you'd imagine at that sort of yardage. Hole 5 is the hardest hole on the golf course, at least for my money. It is a 500-yard par 4 that the tee shot is just insanely hard. The landing area for your longest players on tour is about 310 yards where they have this. Almost no one, maybe except for Bryson or Rory, when they have a favorable wind direction, is going to be carrying these bunkers to the left. And if you miss to the left of them, you've got trees, even worse areas over there. You miss to the right, and you're almost laying up to this 500-yard par 4. So this golf course, you can see the teeth really coming in. Hole 6 is shorter par 3, but even these, the green complexes are extremely difficult, so depending on pin location, could still play well over par. Hole 7 is 449. This is a mid-length par 4, and you see you have some room out there to hit your tee shots. It's not like you have to be overly precise like you have at some golf courses. It's just that when you miss wide, that if you don't have the short game, you're usually going to feel it. Hole 8 is 576, so it's your next par 5. This one plays severely up the hill for the second shot, so it's not always reachable for everyone, but most players will get it to at least this marker over here on the right. And then finally, hole 9 to finish out this front 9 is 465 yards, plays severely downhill for your first shot, and then I believe, a little bit back uphill for your second. So one of the easier holes that you have on that front side, because you're really only going to have like 140 yards in because of how downhill the tee shot is. So you're starting on the back, which won't happen this week unless there's some crazy weather and they have to try to get in play. The Masters does everything they can to get everyone started off of hole number 1, but if you do start on the back, good luck. It's a 500-yard par 4, and if it's not the hardest hole, I would say 5 is my hardest hole that we have on site here, but hole 10 is at least up there in the top 3. Next up, you have 11, which is 536, another one of the hardest holes out there, and another one you'd have to throw in the top 3 hardest out there on the entire course. So the hardest stretch of the golf course is, at least for my money, 10 through 12. You have 10, 11 that are both brutes, as we just mentioned, but also 12, which is the infamous par 3 over water. It's got Rays Creek in front of it. It's everything you could ask for over there with the Saturday, Sunday pin. Next up, you have 13, which is the easiest hole that you have at Augusta National. If it's not something like 13, maybe it's that drivable par 4 that we talked about before, but they did add some length here over the last few years, so it's not 100% reachable like it was starting to get towards like 2020 2022, even 2023 before they changed it. But afterwards, it's closer to like a 65-70% rate of people going for it in 2. 14 is 442, so this is another mid-length par 4, and you can see with the tee shot here, some of these wide driving corridors that you have, so that's why a lot of people call it a second shot golf course, because the penalty comes into play with the sloping of these greens. 15 is 558, so another reachable par 5. The reason why this one's a hair harder than what you have at 13 is that the water's even more so in play. You also have a very narrow green complex, which means that even if you can go for it in 2, you have next to no chance to actually hold the green complex. 16 is where we've seen some hole-in-ones, especially to that back left pin location, but this is a trickier hole than you'd see on paper, especially when the pin is on top of the slope as opposed to below, like you get with those hole-in-ones. 17 is 445, so another mid-length par 4, and what you'll see here is that there's a few par 4s that really ask you to have that length. The rest of them are this mid to even shorter length, so that's why it's not an overly long golf course where you have to be a bomber to succeed. Having apex height, being able to launch the ball high and long is always going to have its benefits, but this isn't a golf course like a US Open or PGA Championship where sometimes you have to have that kind of skill set. And then finally, 18 is 475. This is a real tough tee shot. You have to shape it from left to right to have any chance at holding this, especially when it gets firm and fast out there. And then your second shot is back up the hill to an extremely sloped green. So everyone knows 18 at Augusta. Everyone's seen videos, highlights out there from the finishing putt. So it's a great finishing hole to an overly great championship. And now that we've seen the golf course, let's go through our modeling for this week and the kind of key stats that I'm using to identify my plays. So we're going to start it off with shots gained off the tee. By the way, this is the bet the number model that we're going to be going with. The sponsor of these videos and a great resource for all these different courses because they're there in person, they're working with tour players, and they get a really good sense for what is being emphasized for any given event. So off the tee, regular off the tee combines off the tee accuracy and distance. That is always something that you want to include in your modeling, at least to some extent. It doesn't always have to be a major factor going out there and including, but the major 4 categories, off the tee, approach, around the green, and putting, should at least have some sort of a mark in your modeling. So you can see over here the best off the tee players, including live guys, would be a DeChambeau gaining over 1.3 strokes per round. He's in a class of his own when it comes to the off the tee. Everyone kind of knows that. Pendrith, Rory, Hatton have also been very solid in the category though. Hatton, of course, over there on the live side, so maybe a little bit sneakier than some of these other players, but also a Scheffler, Kevin Yu, Benny Ann, and Davis Thompson are guys that not only hit the ball a long way, but in most cases here, I don't want to call them accurate drivers off the tee, but they're about average, maybe slightly below average when it comes to the accuracy, which around an Augusta National is going to get the job done. You've got some really wide driving corridors, right? A few tee shots where you can't hit the ball into the trees or anything like that, but if you avoid the big number, these sort of guys are going to have a lot of short looks into greens. You've also got apex height, and I kind of hinted at that towards the end of the hole by hole section, but hitting the ball high is a huge asset around this course. Even though it's raining today over in Augusta, it's going to be raining a little bit over there until Thursday. They've got the sub-air systems around this track to go out there and suck all the moisture out of it. And every single time we play here, except for the November Masters, when I think it was Dustin Johnson that went out there and won, it was soft that time of year. But every time they're playing over here in this time of year, it is always extremely firm and fast. And maybe a rainstorm will make it soft for a day or two, but by the time they run the sub-airs overnight, all that moisture is going to be gone. So these guys can launch the ball, into the air, are going to be at a big advantage for stopping the ball close to greens. So you've got guys like Bryson DeChambeau, Keegan that hit the ball really high. Ludwig, it's a lot of your bombers that you're going to see in this category because that club head speed has a direct correlation to how high you hit it. But you've also got some guys like Hatton that aren't the longest, biggest, strongest players that seem to hit the ball very high. Brooks Koepka, the same kind of way. Even your JTs of the world, your Michael Kims, right? He's not known as a bomber off the tee. Justin Rose, surely not a bomber in that category, but another way to take advantage of the kind of golf course here would be how high you actually hit those irons. Distance from edge of fairway, this isn't something that I'm personally looking at a ton this week, but I do want to mention as Bet the Number does have it in their modeling, and this is how far you miss the fairways, right? When you're missing fairways, how far are you missing them from? And the reason why this is important is around Augusta, if you just hardly kind of miss fairways, you're going to be totally fine all day. Like, as long as you can hit a slight cut, a slight draw in either direction, you're going to have access to the greens. Unfortunately, though, right, if you're missing 10, 15 yards into these tree-lined fairways, that's when it becomes more of an issue. So that is what I'm assuming is why they're using this over there in their modeling. So you can see some of the top players in that category. The only thing I'll mention is that driving accuracy has a very low correlation to success. So I'm glad that they're using this distance from edge of fairway as opposed to just regular driving accuracy, as it's going to be a lot more valuable than the other stat, because like if you're missing by a foot or two around this golf course, there's usually, I mean, that first cut, even that quote unquote rough that you have around here is essentially the same length as the fairways. You've also got regular approach play in here. So just like off the tee, it's one of those, keystone stats that you always want to have in your modeling. And I will say that approach play is always the most consistent stat that we have from event to event. How a player is hitting the ball, whether it's off the tee or over there on approach like we're talking about now, those are the kind of things that you can continue from round to round, event to event, and even from month to month out there in the PGA Tour, right? When guys get hot out there with how they're hitting the ball, that's why they can sometimes run the table out there with some top finishes. That's why when we're looking at this iron play, that's why it's the most predictive, the one that everyone, all these touts out there are focusing on out there for every single week, because of that consistency from event to event. So the guys up there like Spawn, JT, Sepp Straka, there's a reason why they've almost all had really strong starts to this year, and also why a lot of them have had some success around this golf course. Like, I know it was a long time ago, but Sepp, a year ago, I guess not that long ago, right, had a top 16 finish here. And you can see some of these other guys like Scheffler, we know he's gone out here and won here twice, but Shane Lowry has a top 3 finish around here. Justin Thomas has a top 10 finish around here. Also a top 4 finish back there in 2020. These elite tier iron players always excel at these second shot golf courses. So it's already important to look at this category, but around an Augusta National, I would argue it's even more important to look at these guys that are popping there. And then also from 175 to 250. So when we were looking at the approach distribution earlier over there from the course breakdown section, we saw that there was a lot of shots from 175 to 250. So if you want to put some extra emphasis over there with the irons, maybe it is that 175 to 250 range. And I would say even like 150 to 200, those shots kind of matter. So I might even like move this out to 150 as opposed to 175, because some of your mid-length par 4s, a lot of them are going to require a shot about 150 yards. And then I'm also looking at around the green. This is a golf course that is extremely difficult. Also one where you have a lot of different shots that you have to hit around the green. So these guys like Patrick Reed, I mean, there's a reason why he's won the Masters before. There are guys up here that have contended in Masters multiple times. I mean, Hideki's won one himself. Sergio Garcia's had a lot of Masters success himself too. A lot of these guys that are towards the top of the around the green list are guys that you see donning the green jacket. So, ball striking matters, but as we were saying when we were going hole by hole, this is a complete test of golf. This isn't the sort of track where you can just be good in one category and get by. You've got to be good across the board. And that includes putting, of course. That's another one of the big 4 categories that we have to always include. So, and we're just looking at regular shots gained putting, because you could look at some of the bent grass stuff. In fact, let me actually just double check and make sure it's not bent grass that they're looking at, because it might be. Let's see over here. Let me click on filter by course. Yeah, so I think they're only looking at, no, so they're not. So they're just looking at all the courses recently out there for form. I thought there was maybe a chance that they'd go out there and just look at the putting on bent grass. But because we haven't seen bent grass here in 2025, you're going to have a lot of players that have no recent form on the surface. In fact, there's probably only a handful of guys that have any sort of recent form on the surface. And I think it's the live guys that have played a bent grass surface over the last month or so. So that's probably why they're not looking at that sort of thing. But putting form heading in, always something that you can look at. The one thing I'll note though is that these greens are so much different than every other set of greens out there on tour that experience really matters, and also it's a different test. So I don't know if that recent form for putting should be the main thing that you're looking at. So I don't think it's a surprise. It's down here towards the bottom end of their modeling. And then the last thing, speaking of experience over there, is shots gained around Augusta National Golf Club. So this is just your career form around Augusta National. This is one of the most predictive course history courses that we have on the entire schedule. This is the kind of course where the more you play it, the better you get at it when it comes to your results. And a lot of your first-time starters here tend to have a lot lot of struggles around this track. In fact, more often than not, those guys are going to go out there and miss the cut, which is why when Will Zalatoris went out here and his first ever start here had, a second place finish in 2021, that is so surprising to see out there with the course history. And it's also why maybe he's got one of the best course history numbers of anyone in the field. So you can see guys that have had success around Augusta would be Scotty Scheffler, who shows up in literally every category. Not a surprise that he's going to be number one in the model here in a second, but Ludwig Aubert also gaining over 3 strokes per round. Now it's only a 1 event sample size with him finishing in second last year, but all these other guys here towards the top end of the list worth some extra consideration. And when you put it all together and we take a look at the top end of the modeling, they've got Scotty at number 1, multiple time champion over the last few years. I would be surprised if he wasn't at number 1 in that category, but guys like Bryson DeChambeau, Ludwig Aubert, Colin Morikawa, Shane Lowry rounding out the top 5, it's a ton of ball strikers. And you got your Brysons, he's in some of the best form of anyone out there in the field. Finally had his best start ever around Augusta National last year with that top 6 finish. So maybe he's trending in the right direction. I bet him for Live Miami. He was leading through 2 rounds. Unfortunately, did choke a little bit on Sunday, which was a tough one to bear. But hey, that's golf then for you, right? It's never a done deal until they get through on Sunday. But maybe he's a buy low spot right now that he kind of faltered out there on the last day. I don't think he's going to be nearly as chalky as if he would have gone out there and won at that sort of price tag. But all these kind of ball strikers you see towards the top, and they're not all bombers. Like you do have your Bryson up there, Bears, but also your Morikawas, your Lowrys that are much more accurate off the tee, your Sepp Strakas, your JJ Spahns that are also more accurate off the tee, mixed in as well. So like I said, this isn't a kind of golf course where off the tee you have to fit a specific mold. I more so just want to see all the iron guys showing up, the guys that are solid around the green players, because of the kind of test that this is, and that is exactly what we're getting up here. And another thing to note, and I'm glad that they're looking at a lot of recent form stats on here. I noticed going through their modeling, there was a lot of like recent 24 rounds, kind of smaller sample size stuff that they're looking at, because recent form really matters for the Masters. This is a golf course where you can't show up there and find your game most times. Usually the guys that are finishing the top 5, top 10 are players that showed incredible form here towards the start of the year. So that's usually the case at majors, right? You can't really fake it around these sort of golf courses. So these guys up here in the top 20 or so in the modeling, going to be where I'm focusing a lot of my outright betting exposure this week. And of course, over there for some of my conviction plays in DFS. And now for 3 comp courses that I'm using as well. So these are just places that you can look at leaderboards, try and find some crossover from event to event, and that should play pretty similar to what you have at Augusta, which is such a unique test that it's difficult to really go out there and find comps. So I did my best with these 3. I don't think there's like 5, 6 comps that you can use this week. This is probably all I would use for that sort of thing. So first off, we have the Texans Children's Houston Open. That was at Memorial Park just a few weeks ago. And as I was mentioning during that course breakdown, if you guys were following golf then, is that it's set up to kind of simulate the Masters. There's no rough out there. It's a lot of shaved down fairway areas around the green. So though it's not nearly as difficult as what you had over there, it is something that you can use for comparison. So obviously Minwoo Lee ended up winning that. You had Scotty finishing in second. That's always a good thing when you're trying to look for Augusta National comp course history. But because you had some legit tier players going out there and playing this year, you can use it for some of that crossover. So yeah, you got that event. You can look at the last few years for that, because it wasn't just this year that they were going out there and simulating Augusta. Back in 2022, that's when Tony Finau won. The year after that was when Steven Yeager won out there as well. And then if we go to the year after, next event, we've got the Century. So this is home the Tournament of Champions. That is over there in Kapalua. This golf course is super long. It's a par 73, so a little bit weird when it comes to the actual setup, but it's just about the same length, about 7,600 yards. And it's also got a lot of elevation changes to it, which I know we didn't talk a whole lot before, especially when we went hole by hole, right? I talked about all the elevation change on a lot of these different holes, but you don't get a lot of that on the PGA Tour. Heck, really anywhere in the world, you don't get a lot of elevation changes at golf courses, because it makes setting up the golf course, the agronomy, all of the logistics of actually having a golf course like 10 times more difficult when you're dealing with the elevation. So courses like the Century that have that aspect, big greens, also a lot of undulating greens like you get over there at Augusta National. A lot of times when we're playing the Century Tournament of Champions, I'm using the Masters as comp course history, and it's the same thing the other way around, right? When we get to the Masters, I'm going to use some of the Tournament of Champions stuff out there for my crossover history. So this year's when Hideki won, he of course won the Masters, which by the way, that was part of the reason I was so high on Hideki this year, is because he had that comp course history over there at the Masters. But you can see the top 5 over there from that year. Year before that was when Chris Kirk won, who, yeah, maybe a little bit of a sleeper play at this sort of golf course, especially because, you know, he went to Georgia. He's from the state. Maybe a little bit of hometown cooking could go a long way for Kirky. But you had guys like Jordan Spieth finish in the top 3 that year. Creative player like Sahith up there as well. So those are some of those around the green poppers. And then, of course, Jon Rahm winning and then going on and winning the Masters just a few months later. It's part of the reason I bet Jon Rahm to win the Masters that year, is because he won the Century Tournament of Champions and then goes out a few months later and then gets the job done at the first major championship. So obviously this year is when we had Hideki going out there and winning. Maybe it'll be Hideki that goes out there and gets that green jacket. But the last comp I have on here is also the Players Championship. So this is another one of the premier events that we have around the tour, which is good from when we're comparing to a major championship. I get a similar strength of field, even though it's a larger field over there at the Players. But guys like Rory won this, another elite tier player. And, you know, guys like Spawn were towards the top end of our modeling. Lucas Glover was towards the top like 30 or 40 out there in our modeling. Year before that's when Scotty Scheffler won. Another great example of having Scotty winning multiple events, and he's won this event multiple times, just like he has over there at the Masters. But Wyndham Clark, he showed up a few times. Now, he's not really somebody I classically think about when it comes to going over there and playing the Masters, but he's shown up at a lot of these comps. He's also a player that at courses that are wide off the tee. I mean, he won at LACC, an extremely wide off the tee golf course that he went out there, was able to really, he handed it to the field over there over the last few days. Wasn't particularly close until like the last few holes. Maybe he's even worth a few extra looks. So year before that was when Scotty Scheffler won that in back-to-back years. There's Tyrrell Hatton, has been in really good form. He was also modeling out quite well. And then also Hideki finishing in 5th over there in that year's event. So just a few comp courses that you can use in your analysis. The Players, you could use the Century Tournament of Champions or the Houston Open. I almost said Houston Valero Open. That would have been completely wrong. But yeah, these 3 different events, these 3 different golf courses, good comp course history over here for this year. Alrighty guys, that is all I've got for the course breakdown this week. Go ahead, smash that like button if you guys haven't already. And for a chance to earn a free month on my Patreon page, which is of course where I'm posting all my modeling, projections, all my prop bets for underdog and prize picks, go ahead and give me your winning score for this week. It'll be on a first come first serve basis, and if you get that exact winning score, you will win free month access over there to those projections. So make sure to check that out if you guys haven't already. To just join the Patreon page, not get it via a giveaway, there will be a link in the description to go out there and join that, which of course is where all the Draftkings projections will be, all the outright bets that I'm taking for this week, and all the props as well, which I'll say for Saturday and Sunday last weekend, we literally did not miss a single prop. We went 10-0 over a 10 unit weekend over there on the prop side of things, which is perfect heading into the Masters and our first major of the year. Got a little bit of extra bankroll to work with. It was a really solid DFS week as well last week. Ended up being about 2x profit over there in the large field GPPs, which, you know, if you're in the big $5 or $20 GPP, that's a good set of ROI when you're not going out there and taking it down. So hopefully this time around we can crack that top 5, maybe even win one of those large field GPPs with all the big player pools and all the big payouts that we have around the industry as well. So it should be a fun one. Best of luck with all the exposure that you guys are getting to. Make sure to stop on by for all the content throughout the rest of the week. So subscribe so don't miss any of that when it drops. Then of course we'll include our DFS and betting preview dropping on a little bit later on this evening, as well as our Wednesday live stream at 7 p.m. Eastern time, going through all the weather, any of the ownership, any of the questions that you have out there before lock, underdog, prize picks, some stat averages out there for round number 1, all the details to make sure we're ready out here for the year's first major. But I'm stoked for it. Should be an absolutely epic week. Stay tuned for everything to come, and let's go out there and take advantage of this week.